What does good debt and bad debt really mean? Is some debt really good? And can the distinction help us make important financial decisions? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 122nd episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey everybody, hope you're having a great day today. I have a podcast for you, a show today that's all about debt, and looking forward to it. One thing I wanted to mention, about a week or so ago, in my weekly newsletter, I added a feature to it at the start, and just an idea I had. And what I did was I asked a simple question. The first question I asked was, what software or tool do you use to track your spending and your budget? And I asked folks to hit reply and let me know. Most people just hit reply in one word: Mint, Quicken, YNAB, whatever they use. Some of them had some more sort of background. Some have been using the same tool for a long time. And the idea was, I've got, there's about 18,000 folks, a little more than 18,000 folks that subscribe to the newsletter. And I thought, why not sort of harness all of that great experience and knowledge, and each week ask a very simple question about finance, personal finance, investing, whatever, and then share the results with everyone so that we can sort of learn from what everyone else does. And that was my first question. I didn't know how many people would reply. I was hoping to get, you think 18,000, but you'd be surprised, even with that many subscribers, how many folks just, for whatever reason, obviously it's up to them whether they want to reply or not, but a lot of folks don't reply. So I was hoping for maybe a couple of dozen responses. And I looked at my email about 20 minutes after the newsletter went out, forgetting, that it had even gone out, because I scheduled it a few hours ahead of time. And I had, 50 email in 20 minutes, and now it's well over 100. And so the responses were fantastic. And of course, they kept coming in long after that. So I put together an article that kind of shared the results of that sort of survey, if you will, and what folks had to say. And there's some surprises in there, I guarantee you. There are some tools that folks use that you've probably never heard of. And that was really the idea, is to see what people are using, share it with everyone else, and then you can decide what works best for you. And so that was my first question, and I'm going to continue to do that. So if you'd like to participate in that, I encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter. And it's easy to do, DoughRoller.net/newsletter. And it goes out once a week on Saturday. That's all with rare exception, I'll send out another one, but that's pretty rare. Just usually goes out one day a week. And I mention that because the listener mailbag, the listener question of the day, it comes from a woman named Dana. She subscribes to the email and responded to one of the emails, one of the newsletters, with a question. And I think because of the first paragraph of her email, this has to be the greatest email I've ever received of all time. And it fits perfectly with the episode today on debt. And so that's why I included it today. So let me read you Dana's email. She says, "I love getting your weekly emails from DoughRoller. I've definitely used some of the information to prove my husband wrong on a few accounts, saving us some more money." That's got to be the best I've ever received. Dana, I love it. And if your husband happens to be listening, feel free to email me. Maybe we can start a support group. But I love that email. That's great, Dana. All right. She goes on, "I have a question about paying off large amounts of debt and the best route to save the most money. My husband got $10,000 from an inheritance. We are planning on using half of that to completely pay off all of our credit card debt and then save the rest. His father recently told us that he was going to be giving us that equal amount of money. Now, I don't know if I would be better to save it, combine it with the other half, and keep it safe for a home down payment in a couple of years, or if we should just pay off a whole student loan in its entirety." Dana goes on to say, "Together we have about $100,000 in debt, so although $10,000 won't make a huge difference, I thought it would be better because it is one less debt to accumulate interest." And then here's her question. "With that being said, is it better to pay off the debt with the highest interest rate, but not a large monthly payment? Or is it better to pay off one that has a larger monthly payment?" That's a great question. She goes on. Finally, where can I look up the rules for gifted money and taxes? I don't want to pay taxes on all this, but my in-laws were under the idea that if half of the money came from one of them and the other half from the other parent, then it would be safe. I look forward to any advice you can give me. So it really has, Dana has two questions. One about the gift tax rules, which we'll talk about. And then the other one is, do you pay off the highest interest rate first? Normally the question I get is the highest interest rate first or the smallest balance. Dana's question is a little different. It's highest interest rate or the largest payment, the debt with the largest payment. Now, so that's what we're going to cover for her question before we get to the main topic of the show, which is related, good debt versus bad debt. So let's start with the gift tax. And as I've said before, I'm not a tax professional. I don't play one on TV. I have no educational or experience in handling taxes. I pay someone to do my taxes. So with that, though, I have a resource that I will include in the article that will go with this gift tax question that you can see on the website. And by the way, that's one of the reasons to subscribe to the newsletter. I include links to all of the articles each week, so it's the easiest way to get them. But we can cover gift taxes pretty quickly. The source that I will include in the article is the IRS. Obviously, we can't get any better resource than that when it comes to federal taxes. And so want to kind of just walk through a couple of key questions on the gift tax. The first is, and by the way, some of you may be surprised that if you give someone a gift of money or other things too, but we'll just assume money, that it could be taxed. Yes, I'm afraid it can. So the first question people ask is, who pays the gift tax? The person that gives the money or the person that receives it? And while there can be exceptions to this, what the IRS says is that the donor, the person giving the gift, is generally responsible for paying the gift tax. Now, apparently there can be special arrangements where the donee, the receiver of the gift, will pay it. But generally, it's the person that is giving the gift that is responsible for the gift tax, right? Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is, well, okay, what's a gift? What do they consider to be a gift? And, of course, the IRS has their sort of legal definition, the transfer to an individual, either directly or indirectly, where full consideration is not received in return, full consideration. So, in many cases, I think it's obvious that it's a gift. In Dana's case, they're a parent may be giving them $10,000, and they're not giving the parent anything in return. They're not working for them or giving them something else of value. So the fact that it's a gift is pretty obvious. I suppose there could be circumstances where it's not quite as easy to figure out, and you'd want to get help from a tax professional. But I think in most cases, it comes down to a family member giving another family member a gift of money, and so it's pretty obvious. So that's what a gift is. Now, are all gifts taxed? No. The answer is no. There are some exclusions, and that's what we're going to talk about here just briefly. The first is there is an annual exclusion where the first certain amount of money is not subject to the gift tax. We'll come back to that in a minute, but there are others. Some that I didn't know about until I looked up this answer for Dana. One is tuition or medical expenses you pay for someone are often part of an exclusion. Didn't know that. Gifts to your spouse, and that makes sense, are excluded from the gift tax, as well as gifts to political organizations for its use are excluded. Now, what Dana alluded to in her email was if their spouse is involved and they both give, or there's two donees of the gift, can that help? And the answer is yes, it can, and this comes back to the annual exclusion. So there is an annual exclusion available where the first certain amount of money of a gift is not subject to the gift tax. This exclusion amount, can go up from year to year. It's currently, as of 2014, the exclusion is $14,000, which means one person can give up to $14,000 to another, and the gift is not subject to the gift tax, and that's an annual exclusion. So you could give $14,000, every year to the same person, and it would be excluded from the gift tax. And of course, again, over time, that exclusion amount may go up. It's currently, as I said, in 2014, $14,000. So then the question becomes, well, what if I want to give money to, say, a son and daughter-in-law, or a daughter and a son-in-law? So there's like two people, in effect, that I want to give money to. Can I double it? And the answer is yes, right? Because you can give $14,000 to, say, your daughter, for example, and $14,000 to your son-in-law, right? So the exclusion is per to each donee. It's on a donee basis. The fact that two people happen to be married or not doesn't matter. And the same is true for the donor. So if you're married and as a couple you want to give money, let's say to a friend or a son or a relative, whatever, you could each give that gift of $14,000 because the exclusion applies not only to each donee but to each donor as well. So one of the questions in the IRS article that I'll link to is, what if my spouse and I want to give away property that we own together? And what the IRS says is you are each entitled to the annual exclusion amount on the gift. So together you could give in 2014 $28,000, right? $14,000 each. So that's basically, in a nutshell, how the gift tax works. Again, you could have some unusual set of circumstances. You'll definitely want to get advice from a tax professional. I will put together an article on the gift tax that basically summarizes everything I've said. It will link to the IRS resource so that you can check that out. I would give you the URL, but it's 1.5 miles long, so I won't even bother to read it. But if you want to check that out, you can look at the site, DoughRoller site, and I'll have a link in the article, the gift tax article, to that IRS resource. The other thing you can do, by the way, if you just Google gift tax, for me it was the very first result that came up. So you can find it in that way as well. So that's the sort of the last part of Dana's question. Now let's get to the question of do you tackle the highest interest rate debt first, or do you tackle the debt with the highest monthly payment? Now, it's an interesting question because normally you would think the debt with the highest monthly payment would be your largest debt, right? Which would be why it's got the highest monthly payment. And if you've got $10,000 to put down on debt, you may not be able to tackle your debt that's got the highest payment. It may be, in other words, the debt may be more than $10,000, particularly in Dana's case where the total debt is $100,000. But that's not always the case, right? You could have, for example, $10,000 in credit card debt where you're paying effectively about 2% of the balance each month, versus say, and have a higher interest rate, versus say a car loan. Maybe you have a 2-year car loan of $10,000. It's got a lower interest rate, but because it's amortized over 2 years, the monthly payment is higher, right? So very, very possible. And so here's kind of the approach that I would walk through in answering this. If I were confronted with this question, the first thing I would do, and this is what I do whenever you're trying to get out of debt, the first thing I ask myself is, can I lower the interest rates? Before I even make this decision, highest interest rate versus highest monthly payment, highest interest rate versus the smallest balance, before I even get into all of that, can I reduce the interest on my debt? All right, that's the very first question. And one of the things I ask is, do I have any interest that I'm paying that's deductible? Now, because that lowers the effective tax rate that you have, right? So an obvious example would be home interest on a home mortgage. There are limitations, but interest on a home equity line of credit, excuse me. You could have a school loan where your interest is deductible. So when you're looking at your interest rates and you're trying to figure out which one's the highest, the point is make sure you consider any tax benefits you get on some of the loans. But putting that aside for a moment, it's a simple question of refinancing. Can you refinance to lower the interest on any of your debt? That's the first thing I would do. So even credit card debt's the easiest to refinance, right? You can just get a 0% balance transfer if you qualify. That's the easiest one, but you can refinance a car loan. In certain circumstances, you can refinance a school loan. You obviously can refinance a mortgage. Now, again, depending on your circumstances, that those options may not be available to you. You may already have refinanced them and gotten them as low as possible, but that's the first thing that I always recommend. Get your interest rates as low as you possibly can. I'm going to assume Dana has done that and the interest rates are what they are. So with that, once you figure that out, the next thing is this. The quickest and cheapest way to get out of debt is to pay the highest interest rate debt first. That's always the cheapest and quickest way, is to tackle the debt with the highest interest rate. Now, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to give you a link to a free tool that you can use that proves not only proves this, but then shows you the difference between, say, paying the highest interest rate debt first versus some other approach. It's a great tool, easy to use. I'll give that to you at the end of the show. But that being said, the quickest and cheapest way to get out of debt is to pay the highest interest debt first. Now, you might think I'd just stop there, right? Oh, if that's the cheapest and quickest way, why would there ever be any other way to get out of debt? You just pay the highest interest rate. Well, it gets a little more complicated than that. And that brings me to Dave Ramsey, good old Dave. So Dave, as you may know, is a big believer in not paying the highest interest rate debt first. And I'm looking at his site. He has a page called Get Out of Debt with the Debt Snowball Plan. And it starts out myth in boldface, myth. I should pay off the debt with the highest interest rate first to get out of debt quickly. It's like, wait a minute. He calls that I just said that's the cheapest and quickest way to get out of debt. He calls it a myth. And then below that in bold, truth. You should pay off the smallest debt first to create the greatest momentum in your debt snowball. And he explains. He says, the math seems to lean more toward paying the highest interest rate debt first. Let me stop there. It doesn't seem and it doesn't lean. That's the math, period. Math never seems or leans. 2 plus 2 is always 4. It's not kind of 4, maybe 4. 2 plus 2 doesn't seem like 4. It's 4. Okay. The math seems to lean more toward paying the highest interest rate debts first. But what I have learned, and this is important, he goes on, what I have learned is that personal finance is 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior. You need some quick wins in order to stay pumped enough to get out of debt completely. When you start knocking off the easier debts, you will start to see results and you will start to win in debt reduction. Okay, so I think Dave's absolutely right. I think if you need those quick wins to stay motivated, then for you, the best bet is to do exactly what he says. Pay off the smallest debts first to get that motivation. Now, you may be saying, well, wait a minute, that's not Dana's question, though. She's wondering if she should pay off the debt with the highest payment. Well, but the same thing could apply. Getting that high payment debt paid off that frees up a lot of money that presumably she's going to put towards her other debts, but that could be very motivating for Dana. And if that's the case, I say do it. I agree with Dave. Now, where I don't agree with Dave is the notion of that's the only way to do it. Everyone should do it that way, which is kind of how I read his article. Maybe I misread it, but when he calls paying the highest rate debt first a myth, it's not a myth. Paying off the highest interest rate debt first is the way to get out of debt, the cheapest and the fastest, period. But the goal is to get out of debt. And if you want to pay off the smallest debt first or the debt with the highest monthly payment first, because it's going to help motivate you to do it. If you don't need that extra motivation, maybe just getting out of debt is your motivation and seeing less of your money go to interest each month. That's what motivates me. Then you may be the kind of person that pays off the highest interest rate debt first. But if paying off the debt with the highest monthly payment helps motivate you, then do it. The takeaway for me, it's not myth versus truth, this way or the highway. The takeaway is this: you got to do what works for you. However, if it's going to be a plan that doesn't pay off the highest interest rate debt first, you should understand the implications of your choice. You should understand it will cost you more and take you longer, and you should understand what that is. If you do understand that and you still think it's what you need to do to stay motivated, then do it. Do what works for you. And again, at the end of the show, I'll have a tool for you that help you bring all of that into focus very easily. The other thing I would say in Dana's case is this: by paying off the debt that has the highest monthly payment, it does free up a lot of cash. Now, the plan, I presume, is to take that cash and put it towards other debt. But what if something were to go wrong and they might need that extra money for something else? Maybe for an emergency, for some period of time, something comes up. Maybe they need that extra money for something else for 2 or 3 months. Then they can turn back to the debt. I think that's a pretty significant consideration. If you're able to create some liquidity, to free up some cash by paying the highest the debt with the highest monthly payment, I think that's absolutely an important factor and worth considering. One of the things we don't know is exactly what the interest rates are on all these debts. Is the highest interest rate 1 or 2 points higher than the debt with a higher monthly payment, or is it 20% higher? I mean, there's a lot of other factors we don't know that I think Dana would want to consider. But certainly liquidity and cash flow is an important factor. So it's not all about the interest rates. And I guess, I don't know if You say, I agree with Dave and I agree on that. I'm not so sure we do, but maybe we do. But I would not dismiss liquidity. It's an important factor, and you will free up some more money, obviously, by paying off that debt with the higher monthly payment. So you'll notice I didn't give Dana an answer as to what she should do. There's no way I can know what she should do. It depends on other factors that we don't know, and it depends on her own sources of motivation. But I'm sure whatever the right answer is for Dana, she will let her husband know, and that's what they will do. And I think it'll work out well for them. I wish you guys the best of luck. That's my answer to Dana's question, highest interest rate versus highest monthly payment. To me, it's getting out of debt faster versus the liquidity and the motivation. Those are the competing concerns, and then from there you can figure out what makes the most sense for you. Okay, I thought Dana's question was perfect for today's show, which is the idea of good debt versus bad debt. Is there any such thing? Why do we have this concept of good debt versus bad debt? What is it? Maybe some of you have never heard of it before. And does it help us make any financial decisions? Does it help us figure out what we should do, or perhaps what we shouldn't do? And so that's what I wanted to cover today. So the first thing I wanted to look at was what do other people say? If you Google good debt versus bad debt, you get a ton of articles. Two stood out to me, one that I actually didn't care for and one that I did. I found an article on CNN. Again, I'll link to this in the show notes. You'll find the show notes to this part of the episode at DoughRoller.net/podcast 122. It'll also be in the newsletter if you subscribe to the newsletter. Here's what here's how they described good debt. They said, good debt includes anything you need but can't afford to pay for up front without wiping out cash reserves or liquidating all of your investments. I thought about that for a while, and I thought that's a horrible definition of good debt. I mean, that may be a definition of when you have to go into debt if it's truly a need. You can't eat without going into debt. You can't get medical care without going into debt. Yeah, you're probably going to go into debt. I'm not so sure that makes it good debt. It certainly makes it debt that you may be in a position you have to take on. I really found that to be a terrible definition of good debt. And so I kept searching, and I found an article on daily finance by my friend Sophia Barra. She actually has written some articles for DoughRoller in the past. She is a certified financial planner. I don't know if I've mentioned Sophia on the show before. Her website is GenYPlanning.com. Great looking website. She's a financial planner, focuses on the Gen Y folks, and she writes for Daily Finance. And I actually found this article, and again, I'll link to it in the show notes. It's probably the best article I could find on the idea of good debt versus bad debt. And one of the things she said was, she asked the question, so could there ever be good debt? Her answer was, there's no hard and fast answer. That's because how you use the debt has a big impact on whether or not you can consider it good. And you can have too much of a good thing, and that's when it can turn into bad debt. And I thought that was such an important point to make. And in the article, again, I'll link to it, you can read it, she walks through a couple of different kinds of debt and talks about whether they're good debt or bad debt, and how maybe good debt can actually become bad debt. We're going to talk about that. But that was probably the best article I could find on this topic. And in part, maybe it's just because it aligns with my own thinking. So here's my view. We're going to talk about what people describe as good debt and what people describe as bad debt. I think it's sort of the wrong way to look at it. I look at it as this. There's three kinds of debt. There's debt, bad debt, and horrible debt. I'm not sure I would ever describe debt as good. I mean, let's be honest. If I could be debt-free right now, and I guess as I think about it, I could be. I could pay off my mortgage. There are reasons I haven't. So maybe this is not the right approach, but I think it is. But we'd all prefer to be debt-free. We don't want debt. Why would we want debt? So to me, the idea of good debt, I don't really like it. I prefer debt, bad debt, and horrible debt. So let me describe what I mean. What I call debt, I think most people would call good debt. And it's this: debt used to buy something that either will go up in value or produce income. To me, that's debt. That's what some people might call good debt. So, what are some examples? Well, probably the primary example for something that over the long term goes up in value is a home, right? We buy a home. Most of us borrow to buy a home. And over time, not always, we've seen it can go down for a number of years, but over long periods of time, it goes up in value. And by the way, it also provides a place to live. It also, in terms of the payment to live in the home, insulates us from inflation, right? Because rent can and will go up over time. Your house payment, assuming you get a 30-year fixed loan or 15-year fixed loan, your payment is fixed. Obviously, other aspects of owning a home will go up. Utilities will go up, homeowners insurance will go up, taxes will go up. But the payment for the house itself won't, so you protect yourself from inflation as well. But that's one example. Rental property, that's something that both can go up in value and can produce income. You get both factors there in rental property. Another example, and we're going to talk more about it, but another example is education, my school loan, right? It doesn't go up in value. You don't really think of it that way, but it can help you produce more income. So to me, those are all examples of what I would call debt, but I think most people would call good debt. And I understand the point of calling it good debt. It's debt that ultimately it's this. It's debt that helps us build wealth, right? And debt can help us build wealth. There's no doubt about it. Again, we'd probably prefer to go to school and not go into debt, right? Most of us would probably prefer to pay cash for a home or a rental property. But if used properly, it can, over time, help us build wealth. And so for me, that's what I call debt, or what others might call good debt. All right. So I'm going to skip over bad debt for a moment, and I'm going to turn to horrible debt. What's horrible debt? Horrible debt to me is debt to finance a lifestyle where there's no real assets to show for the money you've borrowed. We can think of examples of this pretty easily. You charge clothes to a credit card that you don't pay off in full that month, and you end up paying it off over years. You do the same thing and charge cards to eat out. You go into debt to take vacations. You go into debt to buy gadgets. These sorts of lifestyle decisions that you finance usually with very high interest rates and over a very long period of time. If you decided at some point after a buying binge and you're $10,000 in debt because you went on a vacation and you bought clothes and you ate out and whatnot, and you said, boy, I've had enough of this. I want to sell the stuff that I bought that got me into this debt so that I can pay it off, you'd be out of luck. You can't sell the vacation you took a year ago. You can't sell all of the restaurants you went to, all the eating out you did. And even things like clothes and gadgets, yes, you could sell those things, but you'd get pennies on the dollar. And so you have no real assets to show for the debt that you've gone into. And to me, that's horrible debt. Now, I suppose one could put in this category medical care, right? You can't sell the medical care that you obtained, a year ago, for example, if you had a hospital stay or whatever the case may be. I put that in a totally different category. Obviously, if we find ourselves in a circumstance where we have to go into debt to take care of to take care of us physically, that's just something you had to do. Now, we might look at why you had to do it. Why didn't you have health insurance, for example, if that were the case, or why didn't you have sufficient health insurance, or whatever. I don't include medical debt in horrible debt because at least medical debt that's a necessity. But in a way, it turns out to be horrible debt. Maybe it's debt you had to go into, and you'd do it again if you had to, just because it's life threatening or whatever. But in terms of getting out of debt, you can't sell it. You can't sell the medical care you got to pay off the debt. And so anyway, that's sort of my concept of horrible debt. And that brings me to the middle category of bad debt. If you think of bad debt, to me, let's imagine you go out and you spend $50,000 on a car and you borrow for it. Probably not the best move, but maybe it's a decision you've made. But here's the thing. You do have an asset you can sell to pay off that debt. Now, yes, you may end up at some point owing more than the car is worth. That can particularly be true if you didn't have much of a down payment, particularly true if you finance it over a lot of years, say 7 years or that kind of thing. But you do have an underlying asset that you can sell to pay off this debt. The asset doesn't go up in value. It's certainly not anything that I would call good debt or even debt. It's bad debt. But there is an asset backing that debt that you could sell to pay off, if not all of the debt, most of it, and again, in most cases. And so that's kind of how I think about debt. You've got debt, or I guess good debt. You've got horrible debt, which is basically debt used to finance lifestyle. And then you've got these things in between. I think for most people, it's a car loan. I mean, let's face it, we'd all prefer to pay cash for a car if we could. They go down in value. When we finance, we tend to buy more car than we need. When you pay cash and you see that money coming out of your bank account, boy, it just stinks. You know you're buying something that's going to go down in value. Really forces me anyway, to spend less on the car. So that's kind of how I think about debt. Now, I think the important thing here is to focus. Let's focus. I think we all agree what horrible debt is. Even if you're struggling with that now, I don't think there's a whole lot of debate there. Where I think the interesting issues come into play is with debt or good debt, because kind of as Sophia mentioned in that article that I'll link to, too much of a good thing can be bad. And so this is where I think the sort of the interesting discussion comes into play. So let's take a house, for example. Yes, a house goes up in value over the long term. We need a place to live. I think that's a reasonable reason to go into debt. Certainly my wife and I have a mortgage. We had a mortgage on our first home. I think most people that buy a home borrow to do so. There are advantages. Certainly the interest is tax deductible. That's not a reason to go into debt, but what it does do is lower the effective interest that you'll pay. And by the way, it's an easy way to figure that out. Let's say you've got I'll just use a ridiculously high interest rate just to make the math easy. Let's say you've got a mortgage at 10%. By the way, that there was a time, and I remember it, when that was the going rate. Anyway, you've got a mortgage at 10%. It's deductible, and you're in the 25% marginal tax bracket. So you can just take 25% of your 10%, subtract it. So that's 25% of 10 is 2.5. Your effective interest rate would be about 7.5%. And you can apply that same logic regardless of what your interest rate is. Just subtract it, take your marginal rate, apply that, whatever it is, to your interest rate, subtract it, and the difference is your effective tax rate. And you can think about it in terms of numbers. If 10% generated $10,000 in interest, let's assume, over the course of a year, and it was deductible, and you're in the 25% marginal tax bracket, you'd save in taxes $2,500, right? That would bring your effective interest payments to $7,500, and that gets you to the 7.5%. So an easy way to figure that out. But the point is, mortgages do have some advantages. Again, tax advantages. Not a reason to get a mortgage, but it certainly should be part of the analysis. But here's the thing: we've heard of this. We've seen folks in this situation. Maybe you're in this situation. That is being house poor. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And so if you've considering a house and you've got a mortgage that's going to eat up too much of your monthly income, it's really going to make your life difficult. And as a rule of thumb, here's my rule that I really don't want my house payment to be more than 20% of our gross income. Now, that hasn't always been the case. When we bought our first home, I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure it was more than 20%. I think it was around 25%. What happens when your mortgage payment goes above 20% is your month-to-month living, it just gets more and more difficult. Things get tighter. It's harder to save for retirement, harder to save to put more away on it for an emergency fund. Obviously, there are other factors. If someone's at, say, 25%, but has absolutely no other debt, they could be better off than someone who's at 20% but has 2 car payments and a big school loan. So you got to take a holistic approach to your finances. It's not just about the mortgage, but what I have found is that as your mortgage payment goes below 20% and gets down to 15%, even 10% of your monthly gross income, huge difference in freeing you up financially. So that's sort of the rule of thumb that I use, is keeping my mortgage at 20% of my gross income or less. Obviously, the lower, the better. Again, you've got to. These aren't rules that you can just apply blindly. You've got to look at your other debt, your other circumstances, where you think your income is going, and those sorts of things. But the real point is, yes, I think borrowing for a home is a reasonable use of debt, but that doesn't mean that you should necessarily go out and buy the most expensive home for which you can qualify for a mortgage. I think that can easily take what is reasonable debt and turn it into bad debt. The same is true for a car. So on a car, I think the ideal is to pay cash for a car. That's what we do now, but we didn't always do that. We couldn't. The problem with financing a car that I've found is that you end up buying more car than you really need. And that's exactly what I can tell you. That's what I did. The first car I bought was an Acura. And I ended up selling it because it was just, it didn't make sense. And I remember my wife and I went to a dealership and I got a Ford Escort. My wife basically said to the guy, "What's the least expensive car you have on the lot?" And they went all the way back. I mean, I think they had to move 5 cars to get this one out. And out came this Ford, I think it was a Ford Escort. But it was cheap. And I drove it. You know what? Life was good. I was fine with it. I hated that car. At least when I first bought it. But, it was perfectly fine. When you finance a car, you tend to spend more than you really need. And if you have to finance a car, the least amount that you can finance, the better, in my view. Now, obviously, there's a lot of judgments that go into that, and maybe your judgment and what it's important to you is going to be different. I can tell you, my mom just bought a car. She paid cash, $5,000 for a used Honda CR-V. She loves it. You can get a good car for $5,000. And, I see folks, friends and family that pull into, to a family reunion or friends getting together. I don't say anything, but I know that finances are kind of tough for them. And they roll in with a new $40,000 or $50,000 car. And I know they've financed almost all of it. And I just think, well, I don't say anything. What's the point of saying anything? We all make our own decisions. And, I just think, boy, that's going to make their finances tough. So I think if you're in a pinch and you need a car and you need to borrow, I think that can be reasonable debt. It's not the ideal, but I think it can be reasonable debt. But I also think for many people, it can quickly become bad debt when you're financing much more car than you need and end up spending hundreds of dollars a month over 3, 5, 7 years to pay this thing off. And by the time you're done, it's worn out and you need a new one. That's a cycle that I think repeats itself for decades for a lot of individuals and families. And it's a cycle that I really think you should work hard to break. That being said, the point is you can take good debt. Too much of it can easily become bad debt. The other example I want to mention, and this is one that Sophia mentioned in her article as well. This is so important. School loans. I think school loans can be reasonable debt. Again, the ideal, I think, is to go to school with no debt. But I do think school loans can be reasonable debt. But you have to consider the kind of income that you're going to make once you graduate from college. And yes, there are no guarantees. But I love the articles of folks. I see these on CNN where people are protesting about school loans. And they'll always interview someone with like $150,000 in debt or more. And they went to some very expensive private school and got a liberal arts degree. And I'm thinking, I don't know, what were you thinking? I mean, now, by the way, I'm not criticizing a liberal arts degree. My degree in undergrad was in English. I'm not criticizing a liberal arts degree. What I am criticizing is someone that goes out and gets into 6 figures of school loans with a degree that is never going to make them the kind of money they need to justify the cost. Well, if that's true, frankly, whether they got school loans or they didn't get school loans to finance that education. So I do think school loans, can be reasonable debt, but you have to look at the kind of income that your degree will enable you to generate. That's one. And two, really think hard about the schools. If you have children that are getting to that age, or you're in high school and you're looking at schools to attend. I think these very expensive $50,000 plus a year schools, private schools, are not always worth the money. And I know that they have some prestige, and there's a lot of other factors that go into picking a school. But you really need to look at how much you're going to end up being in debt and the degree you're going to get. Because I tell you, you walk out of school with $150,000 in debt, unless you're making a ton of money, it will be an issue for you for at least a decade, and could be longer. So that's another example where I think you could have reasonable debt, but can easily turn into bad debt. In that case, it can turn into horrible debt. So school loans, before you sign on that dotted line, give it a lot of thought. So with that said, does this distinction even matter? Good debt versus bad debt? Is it helpful? Does it help us make decisions about the kind of debt we should go into, the kind of debt that we should avoid? Well, I do think it's helpful to understand that not all debt is created equal. And that is absolutely true. Borrowing money on a credit card to go on a vacation and to eat out all the time is totally different than even borrowing money for a car, or certainly borrowing money to buy a home. All debt is not created equal, and I think that is worth understanding. And hopefully, I think many of you probably already did. Certainly, I hope you understand it from today's episode. Not all debt is created equal. That's the first thing. I think that's an important thing to understand. The second thing is just because something falls into a bucket that most people would describe as good debt, doesn't mean it's good debt for you. It doesn't mean the amount you're going to borrow is good debt for you. Just because for a lot of people buying a home is the American dream doesn't mean it's the American dream for you. It might be, might not be. And you need to think hard about how much you're going to borrow. Same is true for a car. Same is true for school loans, which are kind of, I think the kinds of loans that some people would put into the good debt category. Cars I've seen go both ways. Again, to me, it largely depends on the amount you borrow. But I think understanding that not all debt is created equal, one, and two, understanding that even things that many people classify as good debt doesn't necessarily mean it's good debt for you. That's something that you need to figure out based on what's important to you, what your income will support. Ultimately, I look to, will the debt build my wealth? So, for example, let me give you one last example before I turn to the tool of the day. I started investing in real estate with my good friend from high school in 2005. We bought, and I've talked about this a bit in the past, we bought, at that time, 2 HUD foreclosures. Since then, we added 3 more for a total of 5 single-family homes, one of which we sold to tenants a couple of years ago. So we now have 4 single-family homes. We've borrowed for each of those. And not only did we borrow 100% of the total cost being the cost to buy the home and the cost to rehab it, to fix it up. Now, is that good debt or is that bad debt? For me, it was good debt, or at least reasonable debt. But for someone else, that exact same transaction could have been horrible debt. What are you talking about, Rob? It's either good or bad. No, it's very specific to your circumstances. A couple of things to understand. One, in our case, the property is all cash flowed. Even though we financed 100%, they cash flowed from day one. So we were getting rents that paid off not only the mortgage and all of the expenses, but allowed us to pocket a couple $100 a month. Second, because we were buying foreclosures, each of these homes were worth significantly more than we paid, including the rehab costs. So we had, even though we financed 100%, we had at least a 20% cushion of equity in the homes from day one. And the third thing is that we had the ability to pay the mortgages out of our own income indefinitely. So, and in fact, could paid off the mortgages. I mean, now, just to kind of put that in perspective, we buy homes in Central Ohio. The last home we bought cost $41,000. We put about $20,000 into it. So, we're not buying $500,000 homes. But the point is, we could have maintained the mortgages indefinitely if we had to. So for me, I thought that was reasonable debt to get into, and it certainly has increased wealth. Right, as the homes they went down in value because we started in 2005, but they've come back up. But more importantly, they've produced great income. Of course, we sold the one, and so we're at a point now where we have, we still had some money to invest in some things, so it wasn't really, zero cash investment on our part. But having sold the one property and then through cash flow, we've recouped all of the money we've put into the investments, and then some. So and then of course we have the 4 homes remaining. So. To me, that's an example of reasonable debt, but a lot of that had to do with circumstances beyond just the transaction and our ability to manage the mortgages if a tenant stopped paying or we couldn't rent the place. You compare that to folks that maybe excited to get into real estate, but then just over leverage themselves and don't have other finances to back them up if things go wrong, and sometimes they could just be 1 or 2 missed rental payments from disaster. So, a lot of this is very dependent on individual circumstances, and I think the same is true with other kinds of debt, like, again, how much house to buy, how much car to buy, and everything else. So I think it's very fact-specific, but again, I think understanding this concept can help you in figuring out what is best for you. With that, I do want to mention the tool of the day. I've actually mentioned this before, I'm pretty sure, but it's a great tool, perfect for Dana's question and today's topic. And you'll find it, here's the URL, it's unbury.me, so unbury.me. It's a free debt snowball and avalanche calculator. So the idea is most people now attribute the concept of debt snowball to Dave Ramsey's approach of paying the lowest balance debts first. That's not really what a snowball is, but because that's the approach that Dave Ramsey preaches, folks have associated the debt snowball with that approach. Fine. The avalanche, so people in response to Dave's recommendation came up with the concept of the debt avalanche, and that's paying the highest interest rate debt first. What this calculator will do is allow you to put in all the debt that you have, including the balance, the minimum payment, and the interest rate, and then you can calculate exactly how long it's going to take you to get out of debt using either the debt snowball approach or the debt avalanche approach. Again, it's a free tool, very easy to use, unbury.me. So there you go. That's the tool of the day. Hey, if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to email me. If there are topics you want me to cover, I've got a long list of topics. I've probably got enough topics to get me through the middle of next year. I'm not kidding. The vast majority of them coming from you all, which is terrific. But if you have topics or questions, please shoot me an email. I read and respond to every single one. dr@DoughRoller.net. I would love to hear from you. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.